Hi, welcome to the 1,000 Nights and One Night. Now, when it was the 410th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the sheikh continued. One day I was present at an assembly, wherein were also the youth and the singing girl, and she chanted to us these couplets. Prove how love bringeth low lover those tears that run, lowering him still the more, when pity finds he none." Cried the youth, "By Allah, thou hast said well, O my mistress. Dost thou incite me to die?" Answered the girl from behind the curtain, "Yes, if thou be a true lover." So he laid his head on a cushion and closed his eyes, and when the cup came round to him, we shook him, and behold, he was dead. Therewith we all flocked to him with our pleasure was trouble, and we grieved and broke up at once. When I came home, my people took in bad part by my returning before the appointed time, and I told them what had befallen the youth, thinking that thereby I should greatly surprise them. My daughter, hearing my words and rising, went from the sitting chamber into another, whither I followed her, and found her lying with her head on a cushion, even as I had told her of the young man. So I shook her, and lo, she was dead. Then we laid her out and set forth next morning to bury her, whilst the friends of the young man set forth in their guise to bury him. As we were on the way to the burial place, we met a third funeral, and asking whose it was, were told that it was the singing girl, who, hearing of my daughter's death, had done even as she did, and she was dead. So we buried them all three on one day. And this is the rarest tale that ever was heard of lovers, and they also tell a tale of how Abu Hasan brake wind. They recount that in the city Kakaban of Al-Yaman there was a man of the Fazil tribe who had left Badawi life and become a townsman for many years, and he was a merchant of the most opulent merchants. His wife had deceased when both were very young, and his friends were instant with him to marry again, ever quoting to him the words of the poet, "Go gossip, rewed thee, for the prime draweth near. A wife is an almanac, good for the year." So, being weary of contention, Abu Hasan entered into negotiations with the old woman who procures matches, and married a maid from Canopus, when he hangeth over the seas of Al Hind. He made high festival, therefore, bidding to the wedding banquet kith and kin, Olima and fakirs, friends and foes, and all of his acquaintances of that countryside. The whole house was thrown open to feasting. There were rices of several colors, and sherbets as many and more, and kids stuffed with walnuts and almonds and pistachios, and a camel colt roasted whole. So they ate and drank and made mirth and merriment, and the bride was displayed in her 7 dresses, and one more, to the women who could not take their eyes off of her. At last, the bridegroom was summoned to the chamber, where she sat enthroned, and he rose slowly and with dignity from his divan, but in so doing, for that he had overfull of meat and drink, and lo, behold, he let fly a fart, great and terrible. Thereupon each guest turned to his neighbor and talked aloud, and made as though he had heard nothing, fearing for his life. But a consuming fire was lit in Abu Hasan's heart, so he pretended a call of nature, and in lieu of seeking the bride chamber, he went down to the house court and saddled his mare, and rode off, weeping bitterly through the shadow of the night. In time he reached Lahi, where he found a ship ready to sail for India. So he shipped on board and made Calcut of Malabar. Here he met with many Arabs, especially Hazramas, who recommended him to the king. And his king, who was Kafir, trusted him and advanced him to the captainship of the bodyguard. He remained 10 years in all solace and delight of life, and at the end of which time he was seized with homesickness, and the longing to behold his native land was that of love pining for his beloved. And he came near to death of yearning desire, but his appointed day had not dawned. So after taking the first bath of health, he left the king without leave, and in due course landed in Makalla of Hazarmat. Here he donned the rags of a religious, and kept his name and case secret, fared for Kakaban afoot, enduring 1,000 hardships of hunger and thirst and fatigue, and braving 1,000 dangers from the lion, the snake, and the ghoul. But when he drew near his old home, he looked down upon it from the hills with brimming eyes, and said to himself, Haply they might know thee, so I will wander about the outskirts and hearken to the folk. Allah grant that my case be not remembered by them. He listened carefully for 7 nights and 7 days, till it so chanced that as he was sitting at the door of a hut, he heard a voice of a young girl saying, O my mother, tell me the day when I was born, for such an one of my companions is about to take an omen from me. And the mother answered, Thou was born, O my daughter, on the very night when Abu Hasan farted. Now, the listener no sooner heard these words than he rose up from the bench and fled away, saying to himself, Verily, thy fart hath become a date which shall last for ever and ever. Even as the poet said, As long as palms shall drift the flower, as long as palms shall sift the flower. And he ceased not travelling and voyaging and returning to India, and there abode in self-exile till he died. And the mercy of Allah be upon him. And they tell another story of the lover of the Banu Tayy. Qasim, son of Adi, was wont to relate the man of the Banu Tamim spake as follows. I went out one day in search of an estray, and coming to the waters of the Banu Tayy, saw 2 companies of people near one another, and beheld those of one company were disputing among themselves, even as the other. So I watched them, and observed in one of the companies a youth, wasted with sickness, as he was a want-out, dried-up water-skin. And as I looked on him, he repeated these couplets. What ails the beauty? She returneth not. Is beauty's irk or grudging to my lot? I sickened, and my friends all came to call. What stayed thee calling with a friendly nod? Hast thou been sick? I had been running fast to thee, not threats to keep me from the spot. Mid them I miss thee, and I lie alone, sweetheart, to lose thy love, sad lost, I wot. His words were heard by a damsel in the other company, who hastened towards him, and when her people followed her, she fought them off. Then the youth caught sight of her, and sprang up and ran towards her, whilst the people of his party ran after him, and laid hold of him. However, he hauled and freed himself from them, and she in like manner loosed herself, and when they were free, each ran to the other, meeting between the 2 parties, embraced, and fell dead upon the ground. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 411th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the young man and the maid met between the 2 parties, and embraced, and both fell upon the ground dead. Whereat came there an old man from one of the tents, and stood over them, exclaiming, Verily, we are Allah's, and unto him we are returning. Then, weeping sore, he said, Allah hath ruth on you both. But the Almighty, though you were not united in your lives, I will at least unite you after your deaths. And he bade lay them out. So they washed them and shrouded them in one shroud, and dug for them one grave, and prayed one prayer over them, and buried them in one tomb. Nor was there man or woman in the 2 parties, but I saw weeping over them and buffeting their faces. Then I questioned the sheikh of them, and he said, She was my daughter, and he my brother's son, and love brought them to the pass thou seest. I exclaimed, Allah amend thee, but why didst thou not marry them to each other? Quoth he, I feared shame and dishonor, and now I am fallen into both. And they tell a tale of the mad lover. Quoth Abu al-Abbas al-Mubard, I set out one day with the company of al-Barad on an occasion, and coming to the monastery of Herakl, we alighted in its shade. Presently, a man came out to us and said, There are madmen in the monastery, and amongst them one who speaketh wisdom. If you saw him, you would marvel at his speech. So we arose all and went into the monastery, where we met a man seated on a skin mat in one of the cells, with bare head and eyes intently fixed upon the wall. We saluted him, and he returned our salam without looking at us. And one said to us, Repeat some verses to him, for when he heareth verse he speaketh. So I repeated these 2 couplets. O best of race, to whom gave Hawa boon of birth, except for thee the world were neither sweet nor fair. Thou art whose face by Allah shown to man doth ward of death, decay, and hoary face. When he heard from me this praise of the apostle, he turned towards us and repeated these lines. Well, Allah wotteth, I am sorely plagued, nor can I show my pain to human sight. 2 souls have I. One soul is here contained, while other wanteth in another sight. Meseems the absent soul like present soul, and that she suffers what to me is dight. Then he asked us, Have I said well or said ill? And he answered, Thou hast said the clean contrary of ill, well and right well. Then he put out his hand to a stone that was by him, and he took it up. Whereupon, thinking he would throw it at us, we fled from him. But he fell to beating upon his breast there with violent blows, and said to us, Fear not, but draw near and hear somewhat from me, and receive it from me. So we came back, and he repeated these couplets. When they made their camels yellow, white, kneel down at the dawning grey, they mounted her on crupper, and the camel went his way. Mine eyeballs through the prison wall beheld them, and I cried with streaming eyelids, and a heart that burned in dire dismay. O camel driver, turn thy beast that I farewell my love. In parting and farewelling her, I see my doomed day. I'm faithful to my vows of love, which I have never broke. Would heaven I keen what they have done with vows that vowed they. Then he looked at me and said, Say me, dost thou know what they did? Answered I, Yes, they are dead. Almighty Allah have mercy on them. And at this his face changed, and he sprang to his feet and cried out, How knowest thou they be dead? And I replied, Were they alive, they had not left thee thus. Quoth he, By Allah, thou art right, and I care not to live after them. Then his side muscles quivered, and he fell on his face, and we ran up to him and shook him, and found him dead. The mercy of the Almighty be on him. At this we marveled and mourned for him, and sore mourning laid him out, and buried him. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 412th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Al-Mubard was thus continued. When the man fell, we mourned over him, and with sore mourning, and laid him out and buried him. And when I returned to Baghdad and went into the Caliph Al-Mutawakkil, he saw the trace of tears on my face, and said to me, What is this? So I told him what had passed, and it was grievous to him, and he cried, What moved thee to deal thus with him? By Allah, if I thought thou didst not repent it and regret him, I would punish thee therefore. And he mourned for him the rest of the day. And amongst the tales they tell is one of the prior who became a Moslem. Quoth Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn al-Ambari, I once left Anbar on a journey to Amura, where there came out to me the prior of the monastery and the superior of the monkery, Abd al-Mashiach hight, and brought me into the building. There I found 40 religious, who entertained me that night with fair guest right, and I left them after seeing among them such diligence and adoration and devotion as I'd never beheld in the like of any and in the others. Next day I farewelled them and fared forth, and after doing my business in Amura, I returned to my home in Anbar. And next year I made pilgrimage to Mecca. As I was circumambulating the holy house, I saw Abd al-Mashiach, the monk, also compassing the Kaaba, and with him 5 of his fellows, the shavelings. Now, when I was sure that it was indeed he, I accosted him, saying, Art thou not Abd al-Mashiach the religious? And he replied, Nay, I am Abdallah the desirous. Therewith I fell to kissing his grey hairs and shedding tears. Then taking him by the hand, I led him aside into the corner of the temple, and I said to him, Tell me the cause of thy conversion to Al-Islam. And he made me reply, Verily, 'twas a wonder of wonders that befell us. A company of Moslem devotees came to the village wherein is our convent, and set a young youth to buy them food. He saw on the market a Christian damsel selling bread, who was of the fairest of women, and he was struck at first sight with such love of her, that his senses failed him, and he fell on his face in a fainting fit. When he revived, he returned to his companions, and told them what had befallen him, saying, "Go ye about your business. I may not go with you." They chided him and exhorted him, but he paid no heed to them. So he left whilst he entered the village, and seated himself at the door of the woman's booth. She asked him what he wanted, and he told her that he was in love with her. Whereupon she turned from him, and he abode in her place 3 days without tasting food, keeping his eyes fixed on her face. Now, whenas she saw that he departed not from her, she went to her people and acquainted them with his case. And they set on him the village boys, who stoned him, and bruised his ribs, and broke his head. But for all this he would not budge. Then the villagers took counsel together to slay him. But a man of them came to him and told me of his case, and I went out to him, and found him lying prostrate on the ground. So I wiped the blood from his face, and carried him to the convent, and dressed his wounds. And there he abode with me 14 days. But as soon as he could walk, he left the monastery. And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 413th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Abdallah the religious continued. So I carried him to the convent and dressed his wounds, and he abode with me 14 days. But as soon as he could walk, he left the monastery and returned to the door of the woman's booth, where he sat gazing on her as before. When she saw him, she came out to him and said, 'By Allah, thou movest me to pity. Wilt thou enter my faith that I may marry thee?' He cried, 'Allah forbid that I should put off the faith of unity and enter that plurality.' Quoth she, 'Come in with me to my house, and take thy will of me, and wend thy way in peace.' Quoth he, 'Not so. I will not waste the worship of 12 years for the lust of an eye twinkle.' Said she, 'Then depart from me forthwith.' And he said, 'My heart will not suffer me to do that.' Whereupon she turned her countenance from him. Presently the boys found him out, and began to pelt him with stones, and he fell on his face, saying, 'Verily Allah is my protector, who sent me down the book of the Koran, and he protecteth the righteous.' At this I sallied forth, and driving away the boys, lifted his head from the ground, and heard him say, 'Al-Ayn, unite me with her in paradise.' Then I carried him to the monastery, but he died before I could reach it. And I bore him without the village, and I dug him a grave and buried him. And the next night, when half of it was spent, the damsel cried with a great cry, and she in her bed. So the villagers flocked to her and questioned her of her case. Quoth she, 'As I slept, behold, the Moslem man came to me, and taking me by the hand, carried me to the gate of paradise. But the guardian denied me entrance, saying, "'Tis forbidden to unbelievers." So I embraced Al-Islam at his hands, and entering with him, behold, therein pavilions and trees, such as I cannot describe to you. Moreover, he brought me to the pavilion of jewels, and said to me, "Of a truth, this is my pavilion and thine, nor will I enter it save with thee. But after 5 nights thou shalt be with me therein, if it will be the will of Allah Almighty." Then he put forth his hand to a tree which grew at the door of the pavilion, and plucked therefrom it 2 apples, and gave them to me, saying, "Eat this, and keep the other, that the monks may see it." And I ate one of them, and never tasted I sweeter. And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 414th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the woman continued. So he plucked 2 apples, and gave them to me, saying, "Eat this, and keep the other, that the monks may see it." So I ate one of them, and never tasted I aught sweeter. Then he took my hand, and fared forth, and carried me back to my house. And when I awoke, I found the taste of the apple in my mouth, and the other in my hand. So saying, she brought out the apple in the darkness of the night. It shone as if it were a sparkling star. So they carried her and the apple with her to the monastery, where she repeated her vision and showed it to us. Never we saw the like of it among all the fruits of the world. Then I took a knife and cut the apple into pieces, according as we were folk in a company, and never knew we aught more delicious than its savour, nor more delightsome than its scent. But we said, happily, this was a devil that appeared unto her to seduce her from her faith. Thereupon her people took her and went away, but she abstained from eating and drinking, and on the 5th night she rose from her bed, and going forth the village to the grave of her Moslem lover, threw herself upon it and died, her family not knowing what was come of her. But on the morrow there came to the village 2 Moslem elders, clad in their haircloth, and with them 2 women in like garb, and said, O people of the village, with you is a woman saint, a waliya of the friends of Allah, who died a Moslema, and we will take charge of her in lieu of you. So the villagers sought her and found her dead on the Moslem's grave, and they said, This was one of us, and she died in our faith, so we will take charge of her. Rejoined the 2 old men, Nay, she died a Moslema, and we claim her. And the dispute waxed to a quarrel between them, till one of the sheikhs said, Be this the test of her faith. The 40 monks of the monastery shall come and try to lift her from the grave. If they succeed, then she died a Nazarene. If not, one of us shall come and lift her up, and if he be able to lift her up, she died a Moslema. The villagers agreed to this, and fetched the 40 monks, who heartened one another, and came to her to lift her. But they could not. Then we tied a great rope round her middle, and hauled at it. But the rope broke in sunder, and she stirred not. And the villagers came and did the like, but could not move her from her place. At last, when all means failed, we said to one of the 2 sheikhs, Come thou and lift her. So he went up to the grave, and covering her with his mantle, said, In the name of Allah, the compassionating, the compassionate, and the faith of the apostles of Allah, on whom be prayers and peace. Then he lifted her, and taking her in his bosom, betook himself, and with her to a cave hard by, where they laid her, and the 2 women came and washed her and shrouded her. Then the 2 elders bore her to her Moslem lover's grave, and prayed over her, and buried her by his side, and went their way. Now we were eyewitnesses of all this, and we were alone with one another, and we said, In sooth, the truth is most worthy to be followed, and indeed the verity hath been made manifest to us, nor is there a proof more patent of the truth of Al-Islam than that we have been and seen in this day with our eyes. So I and all the monks became Moslems, and on likewise did the villagers, and we sent to the people of Mesopotamia for a doctor of law to instruct us in the ordinances of Al-Islam and the canons of the faith, and they sent us a learned man and a pious, who taught us the rites of prayer and the tenets of faith. And we are now in ease abounding. So to Allah be the praise and the thanks. And they also tell a tale of the loves of Abu Isa and Kurrat Al-Ayn. Quote Amru bin Masada, Abu Isa, son of Al-Rashid and brother of Al-Mamun, was enamored of one Kurrat Al-Ayn, a slave girl belonging to Ali bin Hisham, and she also loved him. But he concealed his passion, complaining of it, neither discovering his secret to anyone of his pride and magnanimity, for he had used his utmost endeavor to purchase her of her master, but he failed. At last, when his patience was at an end, and his passion was sore on him, and he was helpless in the matter, he went into Al-Mamun one day of state, after the folk had retired, and said to them, O commander of the faithful, if thou wilt this day make trial of thine accolades, by taking them unawares, thou wilt know the generous from the mean, and note each one's place after the quality of his mind. But in saying this, he proposed only to sit with Kurrat Al-Ayn in her lord's house. Quoth Al-Mamun, Right is thy recking, and bade make ready a barge calling the Flyer, wherein he embarked with Abu Isa and a party of his chief officers. The first mansion he visited unexpectedly was that of Hamid al-Twil of Tus, whom he found seated. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. And so do I cease my tales for today, till it be morrow.